In a world where disrespect can easily shake our peace, Stoic philosophy offers timeless wisdom to navigate such challenges. Here are 12 Stoic lessons to help you handle disrespect with grace and resilience. Establishing inner strength. Stoicism teaches us to cultivate an inner fortress of strength. By focusing on what lies within our control, our thoughts, actions, and attitudes, we build a foundation that remains unshaken in the face of disrespect. Establishing inner peace is a profound and transformative journey that individuals undertake to cultivate a deep sense of tranquility and harmony within themselves. It is a process that draws upon the wisdom of ancient philosophical and spiritual traditions, offering timeless guidance on how to navigate the complexities of human existence with grace and equanimity. At its essence, establishing inner peace involves a commitment to introspection and self-awareness, as well as a willingness to let go of attachments and expectations that can disturb our mental and emotional balance. This journey begins with a fundamental recognition of the impermanent nature of life and an acceptance of the inevitability of change. By embracing Stoic principles, such as focusing on what lies within our control and cultivating resilience in the face of adversity, individuals can lay the groundwork for inner peace. It also entails the practice of mindfulness, which involves being fully present in the moment and observing our thoughts and emotions without judgment. Through mindfulness, we learn to cultivate a deep sense of self-awareness and to respond to life's challenges with clarity and composure. Additionally, establishing inner peace requires nurturing qualities such as compassion, gratitude, and forgiveness. By cultivating compassion for ourselves and others, we can heal past wounds and foster deeper connections with those around us. Gratitude helps us to cultivate a sense of abundance and appreciation for the blessings in our lives, while forgiveness allows us to release the burden of resentment and move forward with an open heart. Ultimately, the journey of establishing inner peace is deeply personal and ongoing, requiring dedication, patience, and a willingness to embrace both the light and dark aspects of our inner selves. However, for those who embark on this journey with sincerity and determination, the rewards are profound. A deep sense of serenity, contentment, and fulfillment that transcends the ups and downs of external circumstances. Practicing detachment, Stoics emphasize the importance of detachment from external outcomes. By relinquishing our attachment to others' opinions and actions, we free ourselves from the grip of disrespect, allowing us to remain grounded in our own truth. Practicing detachment is a profound and liberating journey that individuals undertake to free themselves from the grip of attachment and expectation. Rooted in the wisdom of various spiritual and philosophical traditions, including Stoicism, Buddhism, and Taoism, practicing detachment involves cultivating a mindset of non-attachment to outcomes and possessions. At its core, detachment is about releasing the need to control external circumstances and finding inner peace and contentment regardless of the ups and downs of life. This journey begins with a fundamental shift in perspective, recognizing that attachment to people, material possessions, and outcomes ultimately leads to suffering. By embracing the Stoic principle of focusing on what lies within our control and accepting with equanimity what lies beyond it, individuals can begin to loosen the grip of attachment and find greater freedom and resilience in the face of life's challenges. Detachment also involves cultivating mindfulness, the practice of being fully present in the moment and observing our thoughts and emotions without judgment. Through mindfulness, we develop the awareness to recognize when attachment arises and the ability to let go of it with grace and ease. Additionally, practicing detachment requires cultivating qualities such as acceptance, gratitude, and compassion. Acceptance allows us to embrace life as it is, without clinging to unrealistic expectations or desires for things to be different. Gratitude helps us to cultivate a sense of abundance and appreciation for the blessings in our lives, while compassion enables us to extend kindness and understanding to ourselves and others. Ultimately, the journey of practicing detachment is one of profound transformation and liberation, a journey that leads to greater inner peace, resilience, and freedom from the bonds of attachment, responding with compassion. Compassion is a cornerstone of Stoic virtue. Rather than reacting with anger or defensive, we choose to respond with empathy and understanding. Through compassion, we dissolve hostility and foster connection. Responding with compassion is a deeply transformative and profoundly human journey that individuals embark upon to foster understanding, connection, and healing in themselves and others. Rooted in the teachings of various spiritual and philosophical traditions, including Buddhism, Christianity, and Stoicism, responding with compassion involves cultivating a heart-centered approach to life that is guided by empathy, kindness, and a genuine concern for the well-being of others. At its core, responding with compassion requires a fundamental shift in perspective, one that recognizes the inherent dignity and worth of every individual, regardless of their actions or circumstances. It involves seeing beyond surface-level differences and recognizing the shared humanity that binds us all together. This journey begins with cultivating self-compassion, the practice of extending the same warmth, understanding, and forgiveness to oneself that one would offer to a dear friend. By nurturing a deep sense of self-love and acceptance, individuals are better able to cultivate compassion for others and respond to their suffering with genuine empathy and kindness. Responding with compassion also involves developing the capacity to listen deeply and attentively to the experiences and emotions of others, without judgment or the need to fix or solve their problems. It requires the willingness to bear witness to the pain and struggles of others with an open heart and a non-judgmental presence. Additionally, responding with compassion involves actively seeking out opportunities to alleviate the suffering of others through acts of kindness, generosity, and service. It entails extending a helping hand to those in need, offering words of encouragement and support, and standing up for justice and equality in the face of oppression and injustice. Ultimately, the journey of responding with compassion is one of profound transformation and growth, a journey that leads to greater understanding, connection, and fulfillment in both oneself and others. Cultivating self-mastery. Stoicism teaches us to cultivate self-mastery in the face of disrespect. By practicing discipline and self-control, we harness our emotions and impulses, responding to provocation with wisdom and poise. Cultivating self-mastery is a profound and transformative journey that individuals embark upon to harness their inner strength, cultivate resilience, and unleash their fullest potential. Rooted in the teachings of various philosophical and spiritual traditions, including Stoicism, Buddhism, and Taoism, cultivating self-mastery involves a commitment to self-discovery, self-discipline, and self-awareness. At its core, self-mastery is about taking ownership of one's thoughts, emotions, and actions, and aligning them with one's highest values and aspirations. This journey begins with a deep exploration of the self, a journey of self-discovery that involves examining one's beliefs, habits, and patterns of behavior with honesty and clarity. By shining a light on the parts of ourselves that are in need of healing and growth, individuals can begin to cultivate greater self-awareness and understanding, laying the foundation for true mastery over oneself. Cultivating self-mastery also requires the practice of self-discipline, the willingness to make conscious choices and take deliberate actions that are in alignment with one's goals and values, even in the face of temptation, distraction, or adversity. It involves developing the capacity to delay gratification, overcome procrastination, and stay focused on the task at hand, no matter how challenging or daunting it may seem. Additionally, cultivating self-mastery entails the development of emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize, understand, and manage one's own emotions, as well as the emotions of others. It involves cultivating qualities such as resilience, adaptability, and perseverance, allowing individuals to navigate life's ups and downs with grace and fortitude. Ultimately, the journey of cultivating self-mastery is one of profound transformation and growth, a journey that leads to greater self-confidence, inner peace, and fulfillment in all areas of life. Embracing adversity is a crucible for growth. Stoics embrace challenges as opportunities to strengthen their character and resilience. In the face of disrespect, we see an invitation to rise above negativity and emerge stronger. Embracing adversity is a courageous and transformative journey that individuals undertake to cultivate resilience, strength, and growth in the face of life's inevitable challenges. Rooted in the wisdom of various philosophical and spiritual traditions, including Stoicism, Buddhism, and existentialism, embracing adversity involves a fundamental shift in perspective, a recognition that challenges and obstacles are not obstacles, but rather opportunities for growth and self-discovery. At its core, embracing adversity requires a willingness to confront discomfort and uncertainty head-on, rather than avoiding or resisting it. It involves embracing the inherent impermanence and unpredictability of life, and finding meaning and purpose amidst the inevitable ups and downs. This journey begins with cultivating a mindset of resilience, a steadfast determination to persevere in the face of adversity, and to bounce back stronger and wiser than before. It involves recognizing that setbacks and failures are not signs of weakness, but rather opportunities for learning and growth. By reframing adversity as a catalyst for personal and spiritual growth, individuals can transform even the most challenging experiences into valuable opportunities for self-discovery and empowerment. Embracing adversity also involves cultivating mindfulness, the practice of being fully present in the moment and accepting things as they are, without judgment or resistance. Through mindfulness, individuals develop the capacity to navigate difficult emotions and experiences with greater ease and equanimity, and to respond to adversity with wisdom and compassion. Additionally, embracing adversity requires cultivating self-compassion, the practice of extending kindness, understanding, and forgiveness to oneself in the face of failure, disappointment, and suffering. By nurturing a deep sense of self-love and acceptance, individuals can weather life's storms with greater resilience and grace, and emerge from adversity with renewed strength, clarity, and purpose. Ultimately, the journey of embracing adversity is one of profound transformation and growth, a journey that leads to greater resilience, wisdom, and inner peace. Focusing on virtue, not reputation. Stoicism reminds us that our worth lies in our character, not in the opinions of others. Instead of seeking validation or defending our reputation, we prioritize living in alignment with our values. Focusing on virtue, not reputation, is a transformative journey that individuals undertake to cultivate integrity, authenticity, and moral excellence in their lives. Rooted in the teachings of ancient philosophical traditions such as Stoicism, Aristotle's ethics, and Confucianism, this journey involves shifting one's focus from external validation and social approval to internal values and principles. At its core, focusing on virtue requires a commitment to living in alignment with one's highest ideals and ethical standards, regardless of the opinions or judgments of others. It entails cultivating virtues such as honesty, kindness, courage, humility, and wisdom, and striving to embody these qualities in every aspect of one's life. This journey begins with a deep examination of one's values and beliefs, as well as an honest assessment of one's strengths and weaknesses. By identifying the virtues that are most important to them and committing to cultivating them in their daily lives, individuals can begin to shift their focus away from superficial markers of success, such as wealth, status, and popularity, and towards the pursuit of inner excellence and moral integrity. Focusing on virtue also involves developing the capacity for self-reflection and self-awareness, as well as the willingness to acknowledge and learn from mistakes and failures. It requires humility and a willingness to admit when one has fallen short of their ideals, as well as the courage to take responsibility for one's actions and make amends when necessary. Additionally, focusing on virtue entails seeking out opportunities for growth and self-improvement, as well as the courage to stand up for what is right and just, even in the face of opposition or adversity. Ultimately, the journey of focusing on virtue, not reputation, is one of profound transformation and personal growth, a journey that leads to greater inner peace, fulfillment, and authenticity in one's life. In the pursuit of inner peace and resilience, Stoic philosophy offers invaluable guidance. By embodying these 12 lessons, we can navigate disrespect with grace, resilience, and unwavering virtue. Before you leave, subscribe to the channel to receive future videos.